Welcome to the Eat This Book podcast. I'm Michael Whitworth. Each day we take a small piece of scripture and we sit with it. Not a quick snack that disappears before lunch, not a chore you check off of a list, but rather a meal meant to be savored. So pull up a chair. Let's eat. In the age of sail, a ship caught in a storm near a rocky coast faced a terrible problem. The wind and waves wanted to drive her onto the rocks, and her own sails were useless. Worse than useless, because they caught the very wind that was killing her. So the crew would do something that looked like surrender. They would drop anchor. Sometimes they couldn't even see the seabed where the anchor would catch. They threw it into the dark water and trusted that somewhere below, out of sight, it would find solid ground and hold. The ship still pitched, the storm still raged, but she stopped moving toward the rocks. The anchor they couldn't see was the only thing keeping them alive. The writer of Hebrews is about to describe hope exactly that way. An anchor thrown into water you cannot see through, catching on ground you cannot reach, holding a soul through a storm. The writer has just told his audience to imitate those who through faith and patience inherit the promises. Now he gives them the supreme example, Abraham. For when God made a promise to Abraham, since he had no one greater by whom to swear, he swore by himself, saying, "Surely I will bless you and multiply you." The moment the writer has in mind is one of the most dramatic in Genesis. Abraham has just done the unthinkable. He has laid his son Isaac on an altar, knife raised, fully prepared to obey God to the bitterest possible end. And at the last second, God stops him, provides a ram, and then speaks an oath. Not just a promise, an oath. God swears. And because there is no one greater than God to swear by, he swears by himself. He puts his own existence, his own name, his own unchanging character behind the promise. Think about how strange that is. When we make an oath, we swear by something greater than ourselves. So help me God, for example. A hand on a sacred text, an appeal to a higher authority. We invoke something more reliable than our own word because we know our word alone might not be enough. But God has no higher authority to appeal to. There's nothing more reliable than himself. So when he wants to give Abraham the strongest possible assurance, he stakes everything on his own being. The guarantee is God himself. And thus Abraham, having patiently waited, obtained the promise, Hebrews says. One sentence covers 25 years. Abraham received the promise of a son when he was 75. Isaac wasn't born until he was 100. 25 years of waiting, of false starts, of doubt, of trying to engineer the outcome himself, of watching his own body and Sarah's grow old while the promise hung in the air unfulfilled. And the writer compresses all of it into two words: patiently waited, and then obtained the promise. This is the faith and patience pattern from the last episode, embodied in a person. Abraham believed and Abraham waited. The waiting was not passive, it was excruciating, decades long, full of failure, but he held on. And the promise came, not on Abraham's timeline, on God's. The writer offers him as a proof that the combination of trust and endurance actually arrives somewhere. The waiting is not wasted, it ends in the promise. And then the writer steps back to explain why the oath matters so much. For people swear by something greater than themselves, and in all their disputes, an oath is final for confirmation. So when God desired to show more convincingly to the heirs of the promise the unchangeable character of his purpose, he guaranteed it with an oath. In human affairs, an oath ends the argument. When someone swears under oath, the matter is settled. There's no higher form of confirmation available. The writer takes that familiar legal reality and applies it to God. God didn't have to swear. His simple word is already utterly reliable. But he chose to add an oath, not for his own sake, but for ours. He wanted to show the heirs of the promise, beyond any possible doubt, that his purpose does not change. And then comes the phrase that anchors everything: two unchangeable things. So that by two unchangeable things in which it is impossible for God to lie, we who have fled for refuge might have strong encouragement to hold fast to the hope set before us. Two unchangeable things. First, God's promise. Second, God's oath. Both are rooted in a God who cannot lie. The writer doesn't say it's unlikely that God would lie or that God chooses not to lie. He says it is impossible. Lying is not in him. It contradicts his very nature. So you have a promise from a God who cannot lie, confirmed by an oath from a God who cannot lie. Two immovable certainties, stacked one on top of the other, beneath the feet of everyone who has fled to him for refuge. And notice that phrase, we who have fled for refuge. This is the posture of the person the writer is describing. Not the confident, the self-assured, the spiritually impressive, the ones who have fled. People running from something, seeking shelter, desperate for a safe place. The images of someone escaping danger and diving into a stronghold. And what they find when they arrive is not a fragile hope, but two unchangeable things to stand on. We have this as a sure and steadfast anchor of the soul, a hope that enters into the inner place behind the curtain, where Jesus has gone as a forerunner on our behalf. Here, the image turns. Hope is an anchor, sure and steadfast, the two words meaning secure and firm or immovable. But the writer does something unexpected with the metaphor. A normal anchor drops down into the depths of the sea. This anchor goes up and in. It enters into the most holy place, behind the curtain. That's temple language, the most holy place, the inner sanctuary where God's presence dwelled, sealed off by a thick curtain that said, "Keep out," to everyone but the high priest, and to him only once a year. The anchor of our hope is not lodged in the shifting seabed of our circumstances. It's lodged in the very presence of God, behind the curtain, in the holiest place there is. Our hope holds because of where it's anchored. And the writer names the one who took it there, where Jesus has gone as a forerunner on our behalf. A forerunner is someone who goes ahead so that others can follow. The high priest of the Old Covenant went behind the curtain alone. No one could follow him. But Jesus went behind the curtain as a forerunner, which means the way is now open. He didn't go in to keep us out. He went in to bring us in. And the final phrase reaches back to the thread the writer dropped 2 episodes ago, having become a high priest forever, after the order of Melchizedek. The loose end returns. The mysterious priest-king is about to take center stage. The writer has now given his audience the anchor before he gives them the theology. Hope first, and then the explanation of the priest who secures it. Here's what I think we should savor from this passage. First, God staked himself on the promise. When God wanted to give the strongest possible assurance, he had nothing greater to swear by, so he swore by himself. Your hope does not rest on your ability to hold on. It rests on a God who has bound his own existence to keeping his word. The guarantee is not your grip, it's his character. Second, the waiting ends somewhere. Abraham waited 25 years, and the writer compresses the agony into 2 words and 1 result. Patiently waited, obtained the promise. The delay was real, the doubt was real, but the promise came. Faith and patience are not a strategy that might work. They are the road that actually arrives. Third, the anchor holds because of where it's lodged. Hope is not wishful thinking thrown into empty air. It's an anchor that has caught on the one immovable thing in the universe, the presence of God himself behind the curtain, where Jesus has already gone ahead of us. The storm is real, the pitching is real, but the soul does not drift onto the rocks because the anchor is fixed in the holiest place there is. If you're in a season of waiting that feels endless, a promise you believed long ago that still hasn't materialized, a prayer that has gone unanswered for years, Abraham waited a quarter century. The writer doesn't pretend the wait was easy. He simply testifies that it ended. Your waiting is not a sign of God's absence. It may be the very ground where faith and patience are doing their work. If your faith feels like it depends entirely on your own strength to hold on, and you're terrified you'll let go, this passage moves the weight off your grip and onto 2 unchangeable things: God's promise and God's oath, both impossible to break. You are not holding the anchor in place by willpower. The anchor is holding you. Your job is not to grip harder, it's to trust what's already fixed. If you fled to God out of desperation, not out of strength, not because your life is impressive, but because you had nowhere else to run, this passage is describing exactly you. We who have fled for refuge. The shelter isn't reserved for the spiritually accomplished, it's for the ones running from the storm. And what they find when they arrive is solid enough to hold. If your circumstances are pitching violently right now, if everything visible is in motion and you can't find anything stable to stand on, the writer points you to an anchor you cannot see. It's lodged behind the curtain in the presence of God, where Jesus has already gone ahead of you. You may not feel it holding, but the holding doesn't depend on your feeling, it depends on the ground it's caught on. If you've been waiting for someone to go first, to show you that the way through is even possible, Jesus is the forerunner. He didn't go behind the curtain to leave you outside, he went ahead to open the way and bring you in. Wherever he has gone, you are meant to follow. The path is no longer sealed, the curtain is open. Next time on Eat This Book, for 2 chapters, Hebrews has been building toward a mysterious name, Melchizedek, a priest with no recorded beginning, no genealogy, and a greatness that even Abraham acknowledged. Join me as we meet the priest without a pedigree and discover why he points us to a greater priest still. Thanks for eating with me. Until next time, may the Word dwell in you richly.